Good evening. Good to have you with us to the 8 p.m. edition of the Urban Debate. We put the spotlight on Kerala, where yet again the state is grappling with severe flood situation due to heavy rains in the last few days. As per the latest information, over 2 dozen people have been reportedly killed due to excessive rainfall that has devastated lives, caused destruction, the landslides that have occurred because of that. Just to show you the extent of damage and devastation, here are some of the examples that have come from the worst hit districts: Kottayam, Pathanamthitta and Idukki, the worst affected districts in Kerala, with water levels rising due to heavy rainfall in catchment areas. A red alert has now been issued for 10 dams in the state. Pilgrimage to Sabarimala temple has also been put on hold for now. We saw massive destruction, caused flooding in paddy fields in Kochi, bringing to halt the farming over there. Heavy rains in the district resulted in rivers overflowing, which in turn led to river water entering the agricultural fields. We also saw heavy rain triggered a landslide in Kottayam on Saturday. The landslide occurred, leading to massive devastation. 3 houses were washed away in the incident. It resulted in loss of lives and destruction of property. Then in Kottayam, army was roped in after the situation became a little out of control. Over 40 Indian Army personnel were deployed in Kottayam that witnessed loss of lives and heavy damage to property because of heavy rainfall and thunderstorms. A house in Mundakayam in Kerala's Kottayam district was washed away by strong water currents of a river following heavy rainfall in the area. This video that's gone viral, one-story house can be seen slowly toppling backwards and then just getting washed away in the heavy currents. Residential areas, public places, parks, all submerged in Kottayam district, leaving it extremely difficult for people to even step out of their homes. In fact, there was an instance where we saw an entire bridge in Kottayam with scattered debris flowing along with the raging flood waters. The bridge itself completely washed away. All those stranded were saved by rescue teams in this specific area. Even at the bus stand, where a state-run bus was submerged in water, it was the locals who came to the rescue of the stranded passengers and later, with all their might, pulled the bus out of water with ropes. Such has been the strength of locals who've come to the rescue year after year. This has been the story in Kerala. Homes, vehicles, bridges swept away in this flood fury. Even in other districts, this was a story. A case in example was a hut that got washed away by the flood water, and so was a private vehicle. Again, we saw another visual with people struggling in chest-deep water, trying to save their lives and the little belongings that they tried to carry with themselves. Now, let's also get you a couple of ground reports to show you the reality. Torrential rains badly impacting the Kottayam districts, the waters entering people's homes, entering wells, entering fields. People awake brings us this report.
Behind me is the trail of destruction that is left after the catastrophic landslides and landslips that took place in the last 48 hours in Kottayam and Idukki, Pathanamthitta districts, due to which the water levels of most of the rivers have increased following the shutters of the dams being opened. You can see behind me the magnitude of the destruction that's meted out to the families. There are 300 families in this, in the whole 3-kilometer stretch. In this particular area, there are 32 families where this is the situation, where water has gushed into the area. This kind of water, which is not suitable even for any purpose, for any basic purpose, have entered their houses, entered their wells, due to which they are not in a position to even consume the water from the wells. Their furnitures are destroyed, basic properties, and also the 2-wheelers, 4-wheelers which are parked in front of the houses also been damaged, due to which they are finding it very, very difficult to move ahead. There are 5 camps in this particular area. That is a 13th ward in this particular Koranjeri Panchayat, where people have been moved to. In Pathanamthitta district alone, there are Yes, this is basically in the Malapura Panchayat, and there are 81 camps in total in Pathanamthitta district. Nearly 2,190 people are staying in these camps. And Pathanamthitta, Idukki, Kottayam are the worst affected districts as far as the landslides and flash floods are concerned. This is not a phenomenon that's been happening now. Remember, from 2018 onwards, this is the same situation. Whenever there is water levels increasing, water enters this particular area, and the families have been very, very badly affected. They say the authorities do not reach out to them, even though they've been complaining. They've been demanding that a protection wall should be made around this place so that water enters. They are not being heard. Basic pipeline facilities for drinking water has not been provided, and also other basic facilities are not being given. They've filed a complaint with the MLA, the MP, and also various other people. They're hoping that the government authorities, even after seeing this, would come forward and help them so that they can move ahead in life.
This isn't a story of just one area, just this one time, because there were heavy rainfall. Kerala has always seen heavy rainfall. Yes, maybe it's become more erratic now. Maybe it's too heavy at some points. Maybe it's not following the same duration and the pattern. But there is more to the story. And the fact that year after year we are seeing this extent of destruction should have sent the alarm bells ringing a while ago. By now we should be seeing changes on ground. Tonight, that's what we're going to talk about. Let me tell you, last year, heavy rains claimed 132 lives. Heavy rains in Idukki caused a landslide. In Munnar, there was also a landslide damage that was done. Overall, it was seen about 19,000 crore worth of damage. The year before that, in 2019 as well, 121 people killed, thousands evacuated to relief camps. Red alert was issued in 9 districts. About 40,000 crore worth loss was estimated. A year before that, in 2018, heavy rains caused floods, claiming over 483 lives. That was a really bad year. Over 1 million people had to be evacuated to relief camps. The centre had actually declared it a calamity of severe nature. 35 out of the 40, and there was overflow that took place. Unimaginable destruction that we saw in Kerala at that time. Year after year, with varying degree of intensity, but the same story. How do we reverse this? Or at least, how do we minimize this damage that we're seeing every year? That's the big question. The Western Ghats, Karnataka, Maharashtra, worst kind of impact we saw in Maharashtra early this monsoon season. A landslide that almost covered an entire village in the Western Ghats. I say good evening to AVM GP Sharma, President for SkyMed, joining me this evening. Leo Saldana, Coordinator of the Environment Support Group. Rituraj Fukan, National Coordinator of Biodiversity, the Climate Reality Project. Vishwa Mohan, Editor for Environment, Times of India. And Shyam Kurup, Flood Volunteers Family, joining me this evening as well. In fact, let me first up go across to Vishwa Mohan to get an overarching view of this destruction that maybe we've unleashed on the Western Ghats, and now we are being punished for it. Since in the last 4 years, Mr. Mohan, we've seen year after year the same story. What has been the response of the government, and has it actually gone beyond announcements on paper?
Actually, government and environmentalists all know that how to minimize these kind of extreme weather, impact of these kind of extreme weather events. So they have policy in place. How to go about it, it is important because the entire Western Ghats area is quite fragile, quite ecologically fragile. So the policy is there, how to protect it. Due to the climate change, because the climate change is the long-term phenomena, due to climate change, these areas, these ecologically fragile area is quite vulnerable. So government had planned how to minimize the impact of these extreme weather events. And for this, government in 2011 set up a committee under Madhav Gadgil, a famous ecologist. And that committee in 2011 submitted a report that said why 70% of the Western Ghats should be made ecological sensitive zone so that any kind of polluting activities, deforestation should not be allowed. It happened in 2011, 10 years ago. But there was a lot of protest about it because the people on the ground and all the 6 states involved in it, they thought it would jeopardize the economic activities. It would affect the life of the people, the farmers, plantations. It will affect the economic activities on the ground. So due to this protest, the then government had set up another committee under the ISRO chief K. Kasturi Rangan. And that committee had submitted the report and they cut down that ecologically sensitive zone area to nearly 50%. Whatever Mr. Gadgil suggested, it cut down to nearly 50%. So now this Kasturi Rangan committee suggests that the 37% of the Western Ghats area should be declared ecologically sensitive zone. So what does this mean? Once the government notify this 37% of this area, that nearly 56,000 square kilometers in these 6 states, then no polluting activities, no deforestation will be allowed. After that, draft after draft, now we have 4 drafts, but there has been no agreement among all these 6 states. And so far, these areas has not been declared ecologically sensitive zone, and all the polluting activities, deforestations and all, it's going on. What would be the impact if we notify the ecologically that sensitive zone? ESZ means once we notify it, all those kind of polluting activities and deforestation won't be allowed. So in effect, it won't, in fact, minimize the impact of these extreme weather events. If you cut the forest, if you do the construction in the Western Ghats area, if you do construction in the floodplains, the impact of the extreme weather events would be immense. And this is what we had seen in 2018. This is what we are witnessing now. So to minimize the impact of extreme weather events, right, we have to notify ecological sensitive zone in the Western Ghats, and all the states will have to come on board for this.
So two reports, one was the Gadgil report and then the Kasturi Rangan committee report. I mean, just to understand the way things work in our country, a committee was set up, they came up with a report, and then they set up another group to study that report. And then that's how we bought time for several more years. And then as the states began to discuss it, because obviously it's not just one state across the entire Western Ghats, there are multiple states that will be involved. Some of the other person raises an issue, some of the other group raises an issue. The Karnataka government itself has twice rejected the Kasturi Rangan report, refusing to accept a lot of these recommendations. So it just stands on paper exactly how Mr. Mohan just explained it to us. And hence the changes on ground are difficult to bring in. Now we're going to talk a lot more about it. We're going to talk about the extent of damage, what these reports say, also the climate change. But I also want to go across to Shyam Kurup, who's with this group called Flood Volunteers Family. And Mr. Kurup, it's at the end of the day, for all of this, you know, misgovernance or ignorance by our authorities, it's the people who are suffering. Year after year, it's the people who are suffering. It's the people who are coming to each other's rescue to save lives, to save homes. What's been the extent of damage on ground this time around, and how are you all managing it?
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Before I say to that, I would like to add to Vishwamohan sir's comment. When he mentioned about the Gadgil report and Kasturi Rangan report, I was one of the 4 people who had filed a PIL against the District Disaster Management Authority in Wayanad, because in 2019, we worked with NDRF on the floods. We were on the ground rescuing people. Then we came to know that 2016, the year of 2016, a report was made by the government to implement things in Wayanad, like to stop the soil excavation, to construct house in certain norms and all. But nothing was followed. So it was so shocking for me, because I was on the ground, we were on the ground, we knew that if those were followed in 2016, that 2019 would not have been a disaster in Wayanad. So we filed a PL, but it's still there. So I believe that a lot of experts have come here, put efforts. But if government may have limitation, but if those things are followed, then our jobs will be lesser. Like we would not have to do so much things, even the government authorities or NDRF and all. And this time, if you ask me, fatigue is the main issue, ma'am, because every year the volunteers come in, they do. But I can see, because being on the ground, I can see a little less coordination this time compared to last year. Maybe because of the fatigue, or maybe people never expected that the floods will come in any month apart from August, because this time it has come in the month of October. So that is one reason. But from our side, I belong to a place called Alapura. It's least of the four districts affected, but still the Idiki Dam is being opened. So we are prepared with boats. Around 30 boats have been mobilized using fishermen who were the saviors in the 2018 floods. So boats are ready, and we are the district collector has just, while we are talking, the notification has already been instructed to evacuate people. So we are prepared of any emergencies.
Yes, because the government, basis the expert committee's recommendations, is now going to be looking at opening up many of those dams, which means that a lot of people will have to be moved to safety. There will be a significant impact if heavy rainfall continues and these dams are open, and that becomes the next thing to watch out for. Now, like you pointed out, and you actually pointed out a very important thing, that this time maybe the response isn't as much as what we saw last year and last year, because people are now actually witnessing this destruction every year. It's getting, Mr. Fukan, it's getting normalized to a certain extent, that every year we will get into this drill, NDRF will come, SDRF will come, fishermen boats will have to be prepared, people will have to move to camps, we will start collecting, blankets and food for them to give, and everybody will go back to their homes after it's done and continue living their lives. This needs to break. Somehow people need to realize the larger change has to be brought, Mr. Fukan.
Yes, I think for too long the scientists have been warning us, and now I think the time has come where we are already starting to talk about adaptation, because we know many of these impacts are inevitable, and the IPCC report pointed out that so much of warming is already locked in, and we are going to face a lot of consequences of climate change across the country. But it's great that you are bringing out these human stories, these people stories, and this is what the global north wants. They have to see. We know that the COP26 is coming up, and the number one goal of COP26 is to secure global net zero by mid-century and keep 1.5 degrees within reach. But meanwhile, all these communities across the global south, including mountain, coastal, and riparian communities in India, will continue to suffer these disastrous climatic incidents. And the second goal of COP is, of course, to adapt, to protect communities and natural habitats. They talk about how we need to work together, how we need to reduce emissions, but also ensure that ecosystems are restored, because without them, we know what is happening. Meanwhile, in Assam, we have had no rains, deficit rains, and we are not seeing, much. We did not have one single wave of flood across the state, whereas last year we had 9. So such weather anomalies are extreme. These were not predicted to happen so fast and, across the world. These were the worst effects that were predicted maybe, in the next 20, 30 years, but they're happening much faster than we thought they would be. So what do we do now? We really need to ensure that people's resilience is developed. We look to nature-based solutions, and we look to adapt. I mean, that's the only solution. And the biggest answer is to find the finances. And that's the third goal of COP26. So find the finances to ensure that the most worst affected communities are able to adapt to changes, because we know these are going to be recurring every year. Maybe the intensity will be less in some years, but most of the time people have to learn to live with such kind of climate disasters.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I think a larger plan, but hopefully moving beyond paper and actually implementing it, that's the aspect we need to talk about. And as we speak about this ecological change, there is also a climate factor that has to be brought in. Eva Marshall Sharma, good evening to you. A lot of our conversations usually with you are about the rain forecast at that time, the changing dimensions of the weather at that time, and what is expected. But tonight, I actually want to talk to you more about the larger picture. How, is there a change in the pattern that we are seeing effectively for this region, which experts and governments need to start factoring in now?
Yes, you see, it's a known thing, a well-known thing. There is a change in the weather pattern, irrespective of the pockets which we have, whether it is the southern pockets or the central parts, northern parts. There is a change. There is a shift in the weather pattern. But every time we just impose these events on the climate change and try to get away with that. The need of the hour is we think seriously and try to do something about it. Okay, there is a climate change, it's a reality. What climate change does, as we know, it's a high impact weather event. It brings in at frequently. Also, it brings in at some possibly you can say untimely also. They're not expected, but they come. This year, monsoon for Kerala was a little sparing. Okay, actually it was poor for the first 2 months, June and July, highly deficit. August was just about normal. So we got spared. We remember I have appeared on channels, your channel earlier also, other channels. 2018 we discussed these floods in the month of July. 2019 we discussed these floods in the month of August. 2000 again this year 2021 I said it was a little sparing, but then yes, departing month September was a little heavy and it started from there, and then again in the month of October it is unprecedented. Okay, northeast monsoon is not as punishing for Kerala, state of Kerala, as for others subdivisions of South India. It is, yes, October is the rainiest out of that, and by middle of this month itself, we have achieved more than the normal complete northeast monsoon rainfall of the season in these 17 days itself. This is what is climate change doing. Okay, it's a stark reality, and that is what we have to prepare ourselves that these events will be again and again and again. But what we have to do is, possibly as has been brought out by the other speakers also, the ecological balance is disturbed, is disbalanced, I will say. There is no balance, it is disbalanced. We have done nothing much about that. Okay, the drain out time for the water from the farthest and the highest point of state of Kerala, which flows into the sea most of the time. Most of the direction is from the Ghats to the sea. It used to be, I remember, about 2.5 hours. It has increased to 4 hours now. And why it has happened, it is for the expert to see. It is very, very visible. That has increased, and that is what has brought in all these problems which we are facing. Okay, there have been landslides, all right. There have been deforestation. There have been obstructions as such. You see, particularly the riparian pockets, they are suffering the most. All the water bodies as of today, they are almost full to the brim because the land is saturated, ground is saturated because of the persistent rains for the first 15 days of this month for the state of Kerala. And I'm afraid that it's not the end of it. Yes, today weather conditions were okay, tomorrow also will be okay, but then day after onward, again I expect that the rains will increase. So that is going to increase our problems for the agencies which are bringing some, restoring the normalcy for the people, for the victims of this fury of floods. We have to do seriously something about that. Yes.
And you know, while that becomes our immediate response, yes, and everybody needs to come together to ensure we're able to, help people the whichever way possible. It's the larger point that you're making that we need to keep in mind. And the fact, Mr. Leo Saldana, that authorities need to factor this in as the planning goes. Every time a disaster strikes, the response from whichever government it is, whether it's the Maharashtra government, whether it's the Karnataka government, Kerala government, the response is, what can we do? It just rained so heavily. What can we do? There was a cloud burst. What can we do? You know, it was a natural disaster. But it's the experts who are repeatedly saying, Mr. Saldana, that you have to plan for these unprecedented disasters.
Well, I think what nature is trying to tell us is our pattern of development is incompatible with living on this planet. And this is not just in Kerala or Karnataka, just about everywhere. If it's heavy rains and devastating floods here, it's forest fires across the North American region and drought in parts of Africa and so on. So these type of extreme shifts in weather patterns were predicted not just 10 years or 20 years ago, even from the 1960s particularly. One of the major shifts that took place in the 80s was to try and get world governments to get together and look at the consequences of the paradigm of development. There was some effort made in '84 with the Brundtland Commission. There was some effort made with the UNCED Rio Declaration. But after that, what happened was most governments decided to become insular and focused on a stupid number called the gross development product. So GDP determined humanity's progress. And now I don't know what to say about GDP now when you look at the colossal damage that single number-driven pattern of development has caused. This is colossal, and this has happened 3 times in the past 4 years in the Kerala region and Karnataka. Perhaps it'll happen every year. And we have not seen this type of rainfall for almost 5 decades. The conflation of the retreat of the southwest with the northeast monsoon. I mean, how does one explain the fact that it has been raining for 3 weeks non-stop here? And where will the water go when most of the beaches have been taken over by infrastructure? I was in Puduvaipin area a couple of years ago where the largest petrochemical complex is proposed. And my fear is that this is flooding. What if the flooding affects that critical infrastructure? And there is a series of unfortunate explosions of petrochemical complexes. We recently saw the Mangalore refineries have a massive leakage due to the combination of rains and poor maintenance. So all this was anticipated. And the Madhav Gadgil report has been mentioned before, the Kasturirangan sort of amendment or political management to try and make it acceptable. But you know, in 1992, India amended its constitution to come up with one of the most fundamental features of planning. It was Article 243ZD, in which it said that any planning to factor in sustainable development with economic and social planning has to happen ground up. 3.5 decades later, we are still far away from implementing that process. So if we continue and look at what the Prime Minister is doing, look at what the Environment Minister is doing, they are proposing to amend and water down the Forest Act.
Yes.
The 150 million year old Western Ghats is being shaken by human development. So humans cannot develop without protecting Western Ghats. I mean, how much more easier can it get when a 150 million year old mountain range is collapsing? Landslides are taking place. It's not just in Kerala, it's happening across Karnataka. Places we have never seen landslide before has happened. And I would blame that on this reckless infrastructure development. As the automobile sector expands and wants to grow and really grow, they want bigger roads. They're not investing in public transport. They're investing in expansion of road networks across the Western Ghats. How much can a mountain range take? If today we want to drive on 4-lane roads simply because some very, very rich people have very, very fast cars, is this the damage? Is this the cost other people have to bear? We have nothing to do with that. So you can see that there is disparity in terms of how certain people are controlling the government and getting what they want, and most of us are suffering.
Yes.
What we see there today will happen to us in different forms. It may not happen next year, it may not happen in 5 years, it could happen in 10 years. But the one thing is very clear. The consequences of maldevelopment is what we see today.
No, you're absolutely right. And such unabashed, unabated destruction of these ghats is taking place across board. I mean, for mining, in the name of mining, in the name of development, in the name of just for more and more construction that's taking place. You are literally seeing mountains being chopped down. in front of our eyes, people who travel through these roads, and nobody is even batting an eyelid, raising an eyebrow, asking one question in any of these states. And of course, it's the same up north in the Himalayas as well. Several of the Himalayan states, despite the fact that there at least, the regulations are supposed to be tougher, although on ground it's a completely different ballgame altogether. Now, you raised a very important aspect, and I want to take that back to Mr. Vishwamohan. Mr. Vishwamohan, the argument of development versus environment, and to say that, oh no, but development and the economy and the growth of the economy is also important. Very valid point made here. What about the 1,000 crores that we see lost every year because of the destruction that's happening? That is also not just loss of lives for people who don't care about that part and only want to see development, but also the destruction and loss to the economy that's taking place.
I strongly believe that both development and environmental protection can go hand in hand, provided we go for a right policy, how to go for the development. And this is where the concept of ecological sensitive zone comes in. Had we been notified the ESZ by now, the impact of these kind of destructions would have been much lesser. But the point is, when the ESZ things comes up, none of the states have come on board. And unfortunately, I would like to tell you here, Kerala is the biggest sufferer here. And during the discussion, Kerala is the state which vehemently opposed the ESZ notification as far as its areas, it's around 9,933 square kilometer area is concerned. Kerala has objection that it will impact the economic activity on the ground. So there are 6 states to the party to it. Gujarat and Goa don't have much of the problem. Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu and Kerala have the problem. And all these state governments have opposed it. And the reason is it could not be notified so far. So the point is, if we go for development, we have to go it in a very systematic manner without affecting the ecology, environment, and the Western Ghats in this case. All the 6 states will have to come on board. Unless they come on board, it won't be possible. But as we have seen it, there have been 4 drafts since 2004. There was a draft in 2004, 5, 7, and in October 2008. There has not been an agreement on this draft, and the ESZ remains on paper. This remains on paper. So how to build a consensus? Here, a lot of environmentalists have moved the court. Perhaps the NGT or the Supreme Court will have to take a call, because due to political reasons, all these states are not coming on board. They have their own constituencies. They think that the earmarking the ecological sensitive zone will impact the economic activities, will impact the plantation, will impact the agriculture. Though ESZ has clearly said that it will not affect plantation and agriculture activities, it will only affect the big polluting activities, big industries, big construction. Still, states are not on board. So the point is how to come at the conclusion, how to bring all the states together. And here, center will have to play a role. And but so far, it has not been done. And we have seen the impact of destructions in Kerala and in other states. As Mr. Saldana said, Karnataka also faced it. Unfortunately, Kerala is the biggest victim, and Kerala is the most strongest opponent of ecological sensitive zones.
Yes, and one would think that this government now that has been in power, has been voted back to power, and one of the reasons that we were told why people chose for this government to stay was the kind of response that they showed during the rescue and relief in times of flood and fury. But if you're not going to find a long-term solution, if you are not going to take it up in your second term and bring about a larger change, then you're going to be letting the same people down, the same people who brought you back to power. Though I suspect, Mr. Mohan, you know, what you're saying that if the center needs to intervene here and possibly that could help, I don't know. and I say this very honestly because, Mr. Saldana, there is an environment impact assessment draft, an EIA draft, a new law, a change in the current regulation that the same central government wants to bring in that will actually further make it easy for projects to just get their way, for development projects to just get their way. I mean, it's taken over a year and a half for people to fight back, to go to the court and get the government to print this draft in local languages, in 18 different regional languages, such that people can read it, understand the changes government is trying to bring, and then respond to it. The attitude of most states is to shut people's voice out in such cases, Mr. Saldana. It's almost as if you want to villainize people who want to stand up for the environment and want to stand up to protect the nature and their own lives. Mr. Saldana, that point to you, because I'm sure you witnessed this in all your interactions as well.
Yeah, if you can hear me, because the internet is unstable, I guess. But I just want to say that you raised a critical point about how, for instance, the dilution of environmental standards, they are already weak. And if this government is going to further weaken them, you can understand which direction it is headed. So again, I want to repeat that it is a couple of % of people who decide for all of us, and none of us really have a chance to affect that decision-making process. So it is very much more critical now that people across the country realize that their future is not based on how the government gives them good policies. It's how they shape their own future. It has to be ground up, and there is a lot that one can gain, both economically and socially and public health-wise, from ensuring that our pattern of development is in sync with what nature allows us. If you go against it, this is what happens. So it doesn't take much intelligence to realize that to go with nature and nature's ways is the only way we have. There is no choice there. And that is why I think the ground-up planning process, which is instituted in the Constitution, must become front and foremost in every one of our efforts so that we mitigate the disasters, but more importantly, we avoid them in future. And we do not build into critical areas, like Mr. Vishwamohan was saying about the ecologically sensitive areas. They are ecologically sensitive for a particular reason, that if you go and interfere there, their backlash is going to be so heavy that there's nothing that we can do to control that backlash. And that is, I think, that humility is demanded of us, which unfortunately we don't have in our legislators and parliament. They believe somehow that, whatever they pass will become reality. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, so let me take that point across. It's a very interesting, valid point that you've made here. And I want to take it across to Dr. Sebastian Paul, former member of Parliament of the Lok Sabha of the CPIM party. Dr. Sebastian Paul, this is for the good of the people of Kerala. This is for the good of the state of Kerala, the state that year after year after year is witnessing large-scale destruction, loss of life, loss of business, loss of property, because we are not able to stop this ecological destruction. Then why is it that the government is not moving in big strides, taking big decisions to bring about a change?
Yes, it is a very valid and relevant question which should be discussed at this time. Now we are passing through difficult times. The situation is very grim and dangerous. This night, all the dams are being opened up. Water level in rivers will go up. All those things are there. Still, we are not crossed the danger zone. But how this is happening? In Kerala, in 2018, we experienced a flood, unprecedented in nature, biggest flood in 100 years, a century. In 2019, it repeated. Now in 2021, again, there is flood. Why this is happening? This is a natural hazard or a natural national disaster, all those things we can say. But there are human factors, contributory factors for this flooding and landslide. What are those things? Because we are experiencing heavy rainfall, flooding and landslide because of indiscriminate changes in land use patterns and indiscriminate quarrying against which the Green Tribunal has given so many directions and orders. And we have the decade-old report is before us, known as the Madhav Gadgil report. Here, we are not concerned about implementing or examining those things. There is a revised report prepared by Kasturi Rangan that is also in the shelf. Because all these things, where are we going? So I am not defending the government, or I am not justifying anybody or criticizing anybody. But for the sake of our existence, we have to do something, and we have to do something urgently.
So you say you're not defending the government. Are you admitting that the government has failed in taking significant action then 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021? 4 years of back-to-back massive destruction. Now, I know we're going through a tough time in Kerala right now, and, you know, the next few days are going to be very challenging. But what's to say that once this rainfall is done and dusted, we will not go back to our normal lives and forget all about it till next year?
That is why I said I am not justifying or defending anybody. After a few days, things will go as earlier. Normalcy will return to the state, and everything will be normal. Everything will be normal means people will go on their old habits. All the habits of destroying the hills, destroying the forests, and destroying the sea, all those things. We have to do something. Some urgent measures have to be taken. And that is why I said this is a timely warning given by nature, and that is repeatedly. Repeatedly, nature is trying to teach some lessons, and we are unable or we are reluctant to learn those lessons. That is why I said after this, there may be some other work or rebuilding Kerala, all those things will be there. Rebuilding, rehabilitation, all are necessary. And along with that, we have to take preventive measures, precautions, because precautions are necessary to prevent disasters.
Disaster preparation is one thing, and but preventing disasters by not damaging the environment is the other. Let me actually go across to Mr. Fukan. Mr. Fukan, all the reports are there. Exhaustive number of studies have been done. Recommendations have been made. Now, if a politician or a government turns around and says, yes, we need to take drastic steps, what would you say they need to do right away on priority?
The most important thing is, of course, to quickly transition away from fossil fuels. This is a global issue. This is the biodiversity and climate crisis are interlinked. They are related to the fossil fuel industry. And also, we need transformative changes in agriculture and transport. And all these have been pointed out by many, many studies. At the same time, we also need to build defenses and warning systems and maybe resilient infrastructure. And being a developing country, I think we can leapfrog many of the technologies. Unless we really transition away from a fossil fuel powered economy and facilitate big business by opening up the last remains, the last vestiges of our natural heritage through the draft EIA 2020 proposals or the amendment of the Forest Act or even the oil palm, that invasive alien introduction of oil palm into Northeast and Andamans. If we do that, we are going to worsen this crisis. At least stop taking these disastrous decisions and help facilitate a transition. There is no use, being responsible for these disasters and then providing relief and trying to earn credits for what you have done. You got to stop the root cause, and that is greenhouse gas emissions leading to climate change, as well as land use change and unplanned development and exploitation of nature that is causing biodiversity crisis. And these are all interconnected. We have to stop taking nature for granted, and we have to take concrete action on climate change immediately.
Mm-hmm. One other big aspect, Air Vice Marshal Sharma, is also the dams and the dams management, the water management over there. With the unpredictability of the weather and the heavy rainfalls that we are now seeing, does that strategy have to change? Because we've constructed these dams all across our hills and mountains, and invariably every time heavy rainfall takes place and we open them, that leads to a larger destruction that where people are caught unaware.
See, having dams in various places, various pockets, it's a need of the hour. Yes, we need them. But then in case of such events, obviously at the moment also, most of the dams, they are full to the brim. And then the situation will come when we have to open the gates. Already, I think the caution is there that it's going to be there. Okay. Uh, uh, what I want to say is, like we just now said that after this event is over, done and dusted, possibly we go into the next year. I would like to extend a caution, not next year, this year itself. From the weather activity point of view, it's going to be an active northeast monsoon season. It has not begun yet. It is just on the doorsteps now. Within about a week, we will have active northeast monsoon season. We do see some even cyclonic storms also. You see, early part of the season, we have already seen 4 cyclonic storms over Indian region. But fortunately, because the season is such that they are all in the northern belt. But then come month of November and then December, they affect the entry gate is Tamil Nadu, but then they come right up to Kerala. We are going to experience under the La Nina conditions of this year, this winters, we will have very active northeast monsoon season. I would like to extend a caution that this is not the last in the list of the event which has happened over Kerala as far as the flooding is concerned. Possibly we need a lot of preparation to gear up for maybe a couple of others. There is a definitely very big chance for having such catastrophic disastrous events, and then we need to prepare in time. Okay, as far as the dams are concerned, obviously that is a long-term policy, long-term infrastructure. At the moment, we got to live with that, whatever is available, and then obviously they are all full to the brim. And then the situation will come now also, and I'm telling you in the next 1 week, we will have to release water out of these dams because 1 week is going to be a good rains, moderate, possibly heavy also at places for the state of Kerala, starting with 20th. Okay, 20th onward for 1 week. So the dams definitely, all the water bodies, why dams? All the water bodies, including the rivers and canals, they are going to overflow again. So from my side, I will say I extend a caution. Still, we need a lot of preparation year after year, and it should be an ongoing affair. Okay, let's not wait from one monsoon to the next monsoon. It is a high time that we save ourselves from this fury of floods time and again for the state of Kerala. Yes, please.
Well, definitely concerning what we are saying, but at least, that should help people also prepare better, be on a high alert, and, for when this happens in the coming days. Mr. Vishwamohan, coming back to you for one last aspect. A lot of the construction that has already taken place, a lot of the development work that has already taken place, people living, townships, villages developed over these areas. What do we do there in these danger zones, which are landslide prone? It's very difficult to convince people to move out as well. So that's a big challenge that most states will also face.
This is where the right policy must come in. Flood in itself is not devastating because it's devastating because we come on the way of the floods. We have started constructing in the floodplains. A lot of infrastructure projects have come up in the floodplains. So this is how the floods is impacting us. And that's why the right policy must come in place. And in the larger climate change context, this is why we need to talk about the twin aspect of dealing with this challenge. One is mitigation aspect when we talk about reducing the emissions, and other is adaptation aspect. How to adapt ourselves, how to adapt our society, the urban infrastructure, how to adapt to face these challenges. And here the right policy must come in. Unless and until we come with the right policy, do the planning in a way to deal with the disaster consequences of climate change, we won't be able to save ourselves. And that's why we are talking here about notifying ecological sensitive zone, how to adapt, how to build the infrastructure so that we can face this flood fury. how to build the cities, how to plan our cities so that it can face the impact of the climate change in the next 20, 30, 40, and 100 years. And as far as the mitigation is concerned, mitigation is a long-term phenomena. India is not responsible for this. It's a global phenomena. Most of the historical polluters, the developed countries, have emitted a lot in the past, and we are facing the impact. So when we are actually facing the impact, how to save ourselves, and here adaptation comes, and center, states, everybody will have to work together to adapt ourselves, to adapt our cities to face the impact of the climate change. So right policies so that we can develop keeping environment in mind must be the centerpiece of the entire discussion and entire policy making exercise. Yeah. Unless we adapt ourselves, nobody can save us, because we just talking about the mitigation will not save us. We have to adapt ourselves, and we have to go along with the right kind of infrastructure, right kind of investment in building our cities, right kind of policies. Then only will be saved, and the impact of the climate change will be minimized. This is what I want to say.
Yes, the right policy. And honestly, I think for that, we need to first change our mindset. I still find that in many of the establishments and government authorities, the response seems to be as if fighting for the environment, or speaking about the environment and speaking about climate change is an aspect of privilege, is an aspect of elitism, which is just going to go against development because you can afford to speak like that. But for a government which in an international basis has taken, spoken about climate change, has taken the lead on climate change and repeatedly talks about, the disasters that can happen, it needs to first look inwards and see what is happening in our states, in our cities, in our villages, in the mountain areas, where every year, because of heavy rainfall and landslides, because of flooding due to the opening of the dams, our own people are dying. Their homes are getting washed away. Infrastructure, bridges, buildings are getting washed away. Lives are getting destroyed. Thousands of crores worth of economy, GDP, gets destroyed, gets washed away every year. So if you are genuinely interested in talking about climate change or prevention of it, thereby talking about stopping of ecological disasters, then we need to seriously look at the policies that we are implementing on ground and change those. Otherwise, same old story every year. The months may change. July, October, doesn't matter anymore. Disasters across the country. Uttarakhand, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Maharashtra, Himachal Pradesh, Karnataka, one or the other state witnessing this kind of a disaster. The answers are with us. We just don't want to acknowledge them. Thank you so much for joining us on this conversation. Well, let me also get you another report from a school that has been turned into a relief camp to provide shelter to flood victims in Kerala. The flood-hit families who've lost their homes say year after year it's the same story. They have to bear the brunt of landslides and massive flash floods. They now demand a permanent solution by the government as well. Listen in.
I'm here at the Aranmula VHS school here in Pathanamthitta districts. This is a school which is now being changed into a camp, a relief camp, following the landslides and flash floods which destroyed and damaged the properties of a number of people in Pathanamthitta district. At least 300 families in and around where I'm standing right now has been very badly affected by the flash floods, and especially due to waterlogging after the water levels in the Pampa River Basin has risen considerably in the last 48 hours. Even though now the situation is receding, the trail of destruction has very badly affected the common man here. You can see the situation out here. They are sleeping on the school desks and benches over here, putting, where they have put a mat on the ground. You can see the situation. People are sleeping on the ground. It's not just young people, but elderly people, kids, women are facing the same situation. The question is, how long will they stay here? When will the government repair, their basic infrastructure where they've been staying for the last years, decades, and they want a permanent solution, especially for waterlogging due to the rise in water level in the various rivers in South Kerala.
Time for a quick break. Lots more on the other side. Stay with me.